Gentlemen, on behalf of my colleagues at Shippax, I would like to welcome you to our third webinar, which this time is dedicated to domestic ferry operations. After all, domestic ferry operators are often the lifeblood of society, being extensions of national roads and offering lifeline services. They have been most active when it comes to fleet renewal and early adopters of new technologies and alternative fuels. So we thought it was very interesting to discuss topics regarding greenhouse gas emissions, so new fuels, alternative fuels, but also COVID, of course, with some key domestic operators and organizations. Let me also introduce Frederik Erdmann, who will co-moderate the session with me. And also good to know, and you will see this in the background, so to say, is that this webinar is sponsored by Elkon. Elkon is an electric system integrator of ferries, among other vessels. Located in Turkey and Norway, Elkon has served the European shipbuilding industry since 1980 and now has a variety of projects at several shipyards in Spain, Italy, Romania, Turkey, United Arab Emirates, and Norway. Actually, the most remarkable project of Elkon is the Svelvik of Bastø Fosen, whose CEO, Øyvind Lund, is one of our key speakers today. This Svelvik, which is a 54-meter-long full electric ferry, has been designed by the Norwegian ship design company and is currently under construction at Sefine shipyards. It will be delivered this summer. Elkon is also responsible for the short charging unit of the Svelvik crossing, on which this new ferry will apply. We have 4 distinguished speakers today. I will introduce the first 2 to you, and Frederik will do the other 2 persons. From the other side of the globe, we have Serge, a French name. Actually, he's also French-born, he told me earlier. And he's located in Ottawa, Canada, and he's CEO of CFA, and CFA stands for Canadian Ferry Association. We had in-depth interviews with Serge and many key players in Canada in the April issue of our magazine. And the Canadian Ferry Association is the national voice of the ferry industry in Canada. Ferries in Canada transport 55 million passengers and 22 million vehicles annually. So it's really an industry to be reckoned with. Then we have Øyvind Lund, and he's CEO of Bastø Fosen, which is a subsidiary of Torghatten, which in itself is a part of EQ2 infrastructure. And they operate key routes between Horten and Moss in the Oslo Fjord. And starting in January, they will take over the concession also in the Oslo Fjord of the Svelvik route. And I briefly referred to this ferry when I referred to Elkon. Frederik will now introduce the next 2 speakers.
Thank you very much, Philippe. Yes, I would like to continue by introducing my fellow countryman, Axel Meynköhn, who is representing Germany on this webinar. He is the managing director of Wyker Dampfschiffs-Reederei Föhr-Amrum GmbH, one of the largest German domestic ferry operators, standing for the supply, the daily supply, the lifeline services to a total of 4 North Sea islands off the coast of the federal state of Schleswig-Holstein, in the very north of the country, just a little bit south of the borderline to Denmark. And that takes us from Germany to Denmark, to our 4th, last but certainly not least panelist, to Halfdan Abrahamsen. Halfdan Abrahamsen is the media and information manager of Ærøfærgerne and of the EnergyLab, 2 bodies of 2 institutions under the umbrella of the Ærø municipality. Ærø is an island in Denmark, and among others, among other pioneer actions, they have actually built and inaugurated the first fully electric car ferry, the Elkon. The Elkon was a topic also at our last Shippax ferry conference that we had 2 years ago between Stockholm and Helsinki. You probably remember that, or some of you remember. And they have actually introduced that ship, a ship without fuel classic conventional backup engine. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, so you see different countries represented, different operators represented, and of course, many of these companies operate in niches. And I assume that, although I know it very well, not everybody knows the island of Ærø. And for that reason, we would now like to ask and invite all our panelists to briefly, very briefly, introduce their own company, their own operation, maybe tell us a little bit how many routes, how many ferries you have, how many islanders you serve, And Halfdan, I suggest we start with Ærøfærgerne. Would you do us the favor to present that company in all brief?
Yes, Ærø lies between Denmark and Germany. You could say it services both the island of Als with one ferry route and the island of Funen with another ferry route, and no, actually with two ferry routes. And that means that we have 3 routes altogether. We have 4 ferries, and we serve 6,000 people, which is the population of Ærø.
Thank you, Halfdan. Axel, I think that's a little bit similar in terms of the number of ships and the number of islanders to you. You're not operating in the Baltic, but in the North Sea. Would you briefly introduce Wyker Dampfschiffs-Reederei to us?
Yeah, thank you, Frederik. Yeah, just a few words to our companies. We are operating here between the West Coast, mainland, in the very northwestern corner of Germany. 4 islands, 2 very tiny islands. We call them Holms, Halligen in Germany, islands where only, say, 100 people are living steadily. And we are calling it 2 bigger islands, Föhr and Amrum. Population of Föhr is approximately 10,000 residents. Amrum is 2,500. Both islands are very touristic. We are carrying 1.8 million passengers per year, some 350,000 cars and lorries and so on, rolling stock, with altogether 5 Ropax ferries. 4 are being operated to the bigger islands, whereof 3 are more or less sisters, double-ended ferry capacity, 70 cars, 1,200 passengers. 1 older unit from 95 with a little bit less ro-ro capacity. And to the Holms, we are using a smaller ferry for 20 cars and 350 passengers, which is largely enough. What to mention elsewhere is that we do not receive any subsidies from the government, which is, I think, a very important point. We have to earn our own life here, and the system is working pretty well in all of Germany since ferry operations started to the islands. Let me put it like this. Last not least, I'd like to mention that we are taking care for public transport on the bigger islands with, Frederik, some 9 buses. Am I right?
9 buses.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Axel. And we move a little bit on to the north, to Norway, Øyvind. You actually, now we had 2 island operators. You are not linking 2 islands, but you are linking the 2 sides of the Oslo Fjord. Could you tell us a little bit about this famous and very traditional Horten Moss operation and your activity there?
Yes, I can do that. As Bastø Fosen is a part of the Torghatten Group in Norway, and we was founded in 1995, started operating the Moss Horten route in 1996, almost 25 years ago. And this is the busiest ferry route in Norway. We transport each year approximately 3.7 million passengers, 1.8 million cars, and we have around 100 departures each day, approximately 36,000 departures each year. We have 6 ferries in Bastø Fosen. All are 200 cars ferries and 600 passengers. 5 ferries are in daily operation and 1 in spare if something happens. So we are now electrifying some of the ferries, and we had a new ferry delivered in December last year, set in operation 1st of March this year. It's the world's largest fully electric ferry. So that's a little bit about Bastø Fosen. And we are starting a small Svelvikverket 1st of January next year with a fully electric ferry.
Thank you. And Serge, we continue with you, and you are the only one of the four not representing actually an operator, but please anyway tell us your background or the background of your institution a little bit.
Great, thank you very much, Frederik. Indeed, I represent the Canadian Ferry Association, and our members transport about 55 million passengers, 22 million vehicles. We go from large ferries such as the Spirit of BC, which is about 167 meters and has 2,100 passengers, 410 vehicles, to the smallest ferry route, I believe, in the world, which links the Toronto to the Toronto Island Airport, which takes about 32 seconds to cross. But our sector is extremely diverse. We have ferries that replace ice bridges on occasion. So when the ice melts, they have a ferry to cross rivers in some regions, to ferries that it's an extremely diverse sector. Again, some on oceans, some on lakes, some on crossing rivers. And indeed, we are also looking at electrification increasingly. We have a number of electric ferries in Canada, and we are increasing that number significantly. A number of operators are looking at that even more. And we believe that we are actually looking at a government that is going to be supporting the electrification of ferries very soon as well, based on the budget that our government brought in yesterday. And if I may finish, we have about 180 ferry routes and over 280 ferries in Canada.
Okay, thank you, Serge. Thank you. So now we have about, let's say, 48 minutes left to further discuss things with our four distinguished panelists. And first and foremost, we will talk about COVID. I don't think we can neglect this, but of course, there will also be life after COVID, and hopefully that will be sooner rather than later. And what keeps the minds of many chief executives or let's say top managers busy nowadays is of course the greenhouse gas emission debate. So even if many domestic operations are, let's say, don't have to follow SOLAS, they often voluntarily follow SOLAS. So, but now back to COVID, which has dominated the news, I would say, for a good part of this year and a good part of last year. And let's say with Serge, to what extent has COVID actually affected ferry operations in such a vast country as Canada? Has there also been any, let's say, financial aid from the government, and if so, who can apply for subsidies or financial aid?
Great. So, as always, Canada is a very large and diverse country. So the responses differs depending on the part of Canada that you're in. So the financial impact on operators has been extremely destructive. We saw operators losing about 90% of their revenues in some cases, and the number of passengers completely decreasing, understandably so, as movement restrictions got put in throughout the country. The government proposed initially a subsidy that would enable ferry operators and the rest of the businesses in the country to keep employees. While this was appreciated, not all of our operators were able to apply for this due to the nature of their corporate structure. Some other funding was provided by the federal government to the provinces. Some provinces in turn supported their ferry operator. The province of British Columbia, as an example, with the federal government, has supported BC Ferries to the tune of $308 million. And through what was called the Safe Restart Fund. Safe Restart Fund, which was given in the fall of 2020, The problem is we're not restarting. We are just imposing new travel restrictions in British Columbia and throughout the country. And the main fear today is while 2020, most people were able to go through 2020 thinking that 2021 would be better. Some people are starting to question that. And the main thing that everybody is praying for in the ferry sector is, will we be able to save the summer? Because we're not seeing the government able to support the economy to the same level that it has last year. So indeed, we are seeing new restrictions in place. The government of BC just announced a number of restrictions yesterday, Ontario a few days ago, and travel in the Maritimes is extremely restricted as well. Financial cost has been devastating. The financial impact has been devastating. The human impact has also been very difficult. We have had crew members affected and some dying, and we have had also significant impact in terms of the morale of the operators, of some operators anyway, especially in some of the smaller regions and some of the smaller operators. We've had a few close actually.
Okay.
Axel, in Germany, I think the situation is in a way similar. We have now been in a lockdown for 5 months. We didn't have, as far as I know, crew members affected on German ferries or in the ports and terminals. But anyway, how is the situation with Wyker Dampfschiffs-Reederei? Have you lost passengers? Have you lost cargo? And what is the perspective for the summer season? What do you expect?
First of all, the situation in Germany is very similar to the one in Canada. Since the pandemic began last year, it came over us a little bit surprisingly from one day to the other, from Saturday to Sunday. I personally was phoned by the government on a Sunday telling as from tomorrow there will be a lockdown with drastic consequences. We were in a lockdown, in a very sharp lockdown last year of almost 3 months, and there was a huge financial impact on our company. We did not receive any compensation, financial compensation for that. We have applied for, but this has been refused by our local government here, not by the federal one. Whereas in another German country, Lower Saxony, our colleagues, they received some money for the losses they suffered in ferry operation. Funny enough, we received money for the public transport because nobody is using at this moment in time the bus, and our buses driving empty on the island for almost 1 year, and we are being compensated for this. This is a little bit, not funny, but this is the situation. Last year we had the situation that the government did a very, I would say, nasty thing. It was forbidden for non-residents to travel to the German islands, at least the island in Schleswig-Holstein, in our country here in the north. It was only allowed for residents or handicraft men or people who had to travel to the islands for professional purposes. And so far we lost about 90% of all volumes, passengers, cars, what have you. We reduced, of course, our schedule to the islands. We cut that. Unfortunately, not enough in order to compensate the losses. It was too much to die and not enough to survive. This was the situation. At the end of the year, we lost about 3 million euro. Again, 3 million euro turnover, which means more or less result. You can imagine this is very drastic. As far as the situation is on board of our ships, it's interesting to state, and we just briefly discussed it today, there is not a single infection being documented on our ships since the pandemic began. And in that time, we carried certainly more than 1 million of passengers. In our view, it's very safe to travel in ferries because in the interior, the air is being circulated 7 times per hour, is being replaced by fresh air. It's, in our mind, very safe. And we tried a lot to motivate the passengers to carry masks, which was not too easy. I do not know how it in other countries. Germans does not seem like very much to wear masks. On the other hand, other passengers are expecting us to force the ones who are not wearing masks. And this was for a long time a challenge for the crews and of course for us as well. Seen for our crew members, it was a bad time. Half of the crew members had to stay at home, but we have in Germany a compensation which is available for everybody, short-time compensation. I do not know, Serge, whether such an instrument does exist in Canada, but the people are getting 80% of their net income sitting at home, which is not too bad, I find. Yeah, more or less, the person in charge for COVID in our company is calling Frederik Erdmann. So he's a very expert in the meantime for COVID and ferry operation. I do not know, Frederik, whether you like to add something. Please feel free.
No, I think that has all been said, but we should continue, in fact, to Øyvind and to look to Norway a little bit. I can imagine that the situation was a little bit different with you, because this is an operation. I mean, the operations, I think many of them in Canada, certainly to Föhr-Amrum, have a focus on tourism. I think you are part really of the road network, so I can imagine that losses were less actually in case of you. How has that worked out? How have you come to the first year of the pandemic?
Yeah, but it's quite a demanding situation also here. We had a drop this year between 20 to 50% of all private vehicles, but we had an increase in traffic on large vehicles, also trucks, etc. That was increasing during COVID-19, but private cars is almost 50%. And also the passenger number is also increasing by 40%. So sometimes we had to also close all the kiosk and cafe areas on board, and they are also closed today. So it has been a huge impact, but not as huge as here in Canada and Germany.
Okay, and what about Ærøfærgerne? Because you're also primarily a lifeline operator, but perhaps also attracting tourists during the summer season. And in many countries, there was a staycation effect, and we could expect another staycation effect for this year. So how have you been impacted by COVID?
Well, it's tough to listen to some of the stories here, and I almost feel ashamed to say that we actually did better than expected. We came out of 2020 €500,000 above the usual result, and we haven't reduced the regular personnel, although we have hired less seasonal crew members. But in April, we only had a third of the normal traffic. In May, we had half of the normal traffic, and then in June, 2/3 of the normal traffic. And we had lockdowns, but people were still allowed to travel. And Ærø is an island with a lot of tourists, of course, and there are also a lot of people who have summer residences here. And a lot of those people saw Ærø as a safe haven where they could travel and be out of the big city where there were higher risk of being infected. We have had very few infected people here. We don't have any now. So a lot of the local people have been worried that people from the big cities would bring COVID here, but it has not been the case. And then in the summer we had huge numbers, and there's because of summer package.
Is the Danish government aiming to repeat it this year? This scheme that passengers are allowed to travel and cyclists are allowed to travel for free. So will you again probably have a very good summer? What do you think?
I wish I knew, because they made this summer package where to support the islands, where they would subsidize the whole ticket price for walk-on passengers, and people had to pay €1 to get their car across, and that meant that traffic simply exploded, and the COVID numbers were also low, so there was not a lot of worry about infection at that time. But they really need to decide soon, because last year we only got the message, I think a month or a month and a half before they implemented it, and that meant we didn't have time to hire enough people, so we had to pay a lot of extra time, overtime, for our regular personnel, and we had to call in people. So I think there are indications that they will do it again. It was a big success for the islands, but I hope they tell us soon.
Okay, yeah, there's a question from Axel, or something you would like to add, Axel?
Yeah, just like to add, it's very difficult to make it up, the losses we suffered during the lockdown, because the capacity, the touristic capacity, hotel and apartments and what have you are the same. This is the same number as before, and you cannot put two tourists in one bed. This is logic, and so far it was quite difficult for us to make it up, this figure. If not, the situation is very much the same as on Ærø here.
Yeah, but then just well, I was just wondering, Axel, because if you see tourist numbers going down, this also affects your freight carriings, because if there's fewer tourists on the islands, you need fewer supplies. So did this impact your operations? I mean, did you see freight carriings, were they plummeting last year, or do you still see lower freight carriings?
No, the freight is more or less stable. It has not been increased like in Norway, but it's stable. Why? Because we have a lot of building activities in the last years, and so far this compensated a lot. We have maybe a little bit less transport for food and such things, but freight is okay.
Okay, so while having you on the line, just one thing, a message which came in from someone in Australia who's congratulating you actually for not having a single virus infection throughout 2020. And he was referring to the Ruby Princess and Diamond Princess. How would you advocate making domestic ferries COVID safe by design or otherwise? And I think it's a general question Frederik and I have. And it's also
for everybody. Yep.
that several people send us. I mean, how do you see the design of your ferries? Will COVID have an influence on how you put your chairs in the future when you design a new ship? Or is this something only temporary? So perhaps I start with Serge. Do you have any input from Canadian ferry operators, how they see how they will operate the ferries post COVID-19, more or less?
Great. There has been already some changes made in terms of the procedures, the cleaning procedures, and the number of steps that are taken to make sure things are safer. Passengers, the number of passengers on some ferries is also limited. So the government introduced some regulations to limit, in some cases, the capacity of ferries when social distanciation was not feasible. So measures were taken by both the government and the operators as well. Where people can sit, where people cannot sit. Food services aboard ferries on occasion were closed. In some regions they have reopened. But we're seeing this as well as a long-term exercise. A number of operators have put in place certain procedures that will be for the long term, not just this pandemic. And the measures we're seeing in place are mainly cleaning, more awareness of for passengers of their surroundings. So quite a few things that that are being done right now.
Øyvind, the question to you, because this was quite controversial in Germany, is it was eventually authorized. Are passengers allowed to remain sitting in their car during the crossing between Horten and Moss?
Yeah,
Is this allowed in Norway?
You know that our new vessels is a one-deck vessel. It's open, so that is allowed in our route to sit. But we have two older ferries with two decks. And at the lower deck, it's not possible. But the government has allowed to sit in the cars on the lower deck when we are having people down there all the time. But that is going, now it's allowed to sit on the lower deck. 2 months ago, it was not allowed. So it's sometimes it's allowed when the pressure on the COVID cases are high. It's allowed, and not when we not have many cases in Norway, it's not allowed, and it will not be allowed in the future on a closed deck.
See, Halfdan, he wanted to make a remark, and I think after that, Serge on this topic.
Yeah, well, I have a bit of an anecdote, because very early on, just when COVID had arrived, and before we had any official regulations, we were contacted by a family from an affected area, and we told them we would like to take them home. I mean, we're an island operator. We feel very obligated to get people home. But we told them they had to stay in the car on the deck. Of course, that was not allowed. But we did it anyway. We improvised, and then we called the maritime authorities, the Søfartsstyrelse as it's called, and they were very upset that we had allowed this. But we told them, look, you have not given us any guidelines yet, so we did what we did, and now they have accepted it, and now they allow up to 6 cars with passengers on the car deck.
Yes, Serge, you also wanted to comment on this, because indeed it has also been a big debate, staying in your car, not staying in your car in Canada, as far as I remember.
It has been a big debate. At the onset of the pandemic, the government decided to enable people to stay in their cars on closed car decks, and they provided the order to the ferry operators, and they rescinded the order in September as a number of cases were going up and up and up, resulting in population in a population that was fairly disappointed, if not angry, and demonstrations, some demonstrations I should say, but some also passengers refusing to comply. I think one of the key elements of this pandemic, and I don't know if my colleagues will agree, in terms of government regulation, has been the mixed messages given by the government. One day you have this regulation, another day you have this change, the third day you have something else that contradicts exactly what was said 2 days before. And I think for not only ferry operators, but passengers, it is confusing, and on occasion extremely frustrating, which is creating the sense of anger that we are getting.
Yes, Axel wanted to comment, but I think the frustration with the changes of let's say decisions, I think it's in many countries. What is blue today is green tomorrow and white the day after tomorrow. So Axel, and then after that I propose that we wrap up this part of the let's say of the webinar. But Axel, you just wanted to make one comment.
Yeah, Just giving you an example, we discussed today briefly, and we decided already, in Germany, a contact app is being used. That means a passenger can register when entering the ships, usually by smartphone, by scanning a QR code, but there are always certain people it's not using smartphones. What to do? The suggestion was to buy scanners, which are costing €2,000 per unit for all of our ships and all of our buses. This is an investment in asterisks of €20,000 approximately. Maybe for a period, who knows it, Serge, maybe 1 week or maybe 4 weeks or maybe 2 months, who knows? Just 20,000. The same goes for these famous plastic wards, which are installed between the seats by many of our colleagues. We calculated again, €50,000 for the whole of our fleet. And as I mentioned, we do not observe any infection due to the very high rate of air circulation in our ships' interiors. These are two examples that we can do too much in this pandemic. And therefore, we must be really considering very careful what is useful and what not.
Yes, thank you very much, Axel, Philippe. I think as time flies, we will wrap up now the COVID discussion, although we have further questions here. Yeah. But we have something else on our agenda, and that is, in a way, as we call it, the greenification of ferry operations. And domestic ferry operations have always been a pioneer in that context. We have seen the very first LNG ferries in domestic operation in Norway, and we have seen other pioneer measures. Among others, Halfdan, we have seen the Ærøfærgerne, the first, as I mentioned before, the first fully electric without fossil backup, the first fully electric domestic ferry. Now, Ærøfærgerne has been in operation for some time. Could you just very briefly give us a summary of your experiences with that, and maybe also answer the question, is Ærøfærgerne already planning maybe a second fully electric ferry after the Ærøfærgerne?
Well, first of all, I can say that we are very satisfied that we went with an electric solution, and the Ærøfærgerne has lived up to our hopes. Not only do we see significant emission reductions, basically we sail emission free because our island has more green energy than we use. So the windmills, they supply the energy, and that means we are truly emission free in operation, and that is great. That's where we want to get to. But another good thing from an operator standpoint is that we actually expect to see savings in the long run because the operating expenses are so low. Incredible energy efficiency of 85%. It's very cheap to fill the batteries with electricity instead of filling the tank with diesel, and she has been sailing very stably. We have not had cancellations, etc. The only thing is that sometimes when we have a direct wind coming right across the ship, then she's a little bit too stiff because we have all those batteries in the bow or in the bottom. And we designed her without a deck. It's an open car deck, and we try to keep all weight off, but that means that she is very stiff. So she moves a bit fast in direct side wind, but otherwise passengers love her. No smog on a Sunday. You can smoke a cigarette without getting smog in your lungs. That's the joke I like to tell. Right now, to be honest, we had a small problem in the transformer house where a component exploded. So we are only charging on 2 lines now, but that's actually the first time we've had a problem in a year and a half operation, and we're fixing that now. But we're actually only charging on 2 lines right now. Normally we charge on 4 lines, but we're very satisfied overall.
Yeah, greenification, I think Norway has been the pioneer, and I think we should now go to Øyvind, because you have just introduced the Bastø Electric, which is more or less like a sister ship, it's an electric sister ship of the vessels you built in 2016/17. which is for me surprising that these ships were still actually diesel mechanic and not already electric. Perhaps you could just mention why that was, and if you could also mention your first, let's say, experiences with the Bastø Electric, which you recently introduced.
Yeah, I can start with Bastø Electric. We set Bastø Electric in operation on the 1st of March this year, and it's been very good over all expectations. No problem so far. But we have only the ferry charter in Horten, so Bastø Electric is going hybrid. Approximately 65% electric, but we are also building a ferry charter in Moss. It's I think it finished in August, and the Bastø Electric will be fully electric. And we had a new contract on the Moss-Horten route, started 1st of January 2017. But the choice, we had to build new vessel, but the choice we took back in 2014 when we wrote the contract. And then the electric ferries we had no experience in Norway with electric ferries. And this was the busiest route in Norway. So I think it's, we didn't want to take that risk when we are, have 3.8 million passengers and 1.8 million cars. The regularity is a key importance in this operation in Norway. So, but see back now, it's we are rebuilding Bastø 4. It's on the shipyard now to have a rebuild to full electric, but a hybrid. But it's going to be full electric, and we will have a rebuild on Bastø 6 in the spring. Will be finished in January 2022. Then we have 3 fully electric ferries, and these 3 ferries are taking 75% of all departures, because it's 3 ferries going 21 hours each day, 365 days a year, and we have 2 other ferries going 6 days a week, only 12 hours a day. They are older ferries and will not be electric in this contract that is out 2027. And this in Norway, you know, the road administration have some requirements in the contracts to have electric ferries, and this is not the case in our contract. So the electrification of the Moss-Horten route is initiative taken by the Torghatten Group and Bastø Fosen alone. But it will not be realized without Enova funding. In Norway, you have some funding, government funding on emission reduction. So this is funded with quite a bit with Enova. So we are very pleased to take this step and not waiting till the next contract is from 2027 to 2036. It's a long time to wait, so many years to have reduced emissions. So we are planning to reduce emission by 75%.
Thank you, Øyvind. Serge, it looks, if you listen to Halfdan, if you listen to Øyvind, that as far as domestic ferries are concerned, at least, LNG is already yesterday's technology. We are moving fast towards fully electric ships. And this is my question, fuel cell technology. Do you think that will also play a role? What is the position? What is the road forward in Canada in terms of politics and also in terms of strategies of the operators you represent?
Yeah. So there are a couple of points in your question. I think there is a movement to go towards electric ferries in Canada. We're seeing the government of Ontario, which has introduced a fully electric ferry. We are seeing BC Ferries that has moved to hybrid ferries and now is indicating fully electric ferries. The Minister of Transport in Canada, along with the Secretary of Transport from the US, has indicated that they're also wanting to support the greening of the marine fleet, and that's moving towards electric ferries as well. The recent budget has provided some a sense that there could be some money to support ferry operators that are willing to switch on that. In terms of trends, Frederik, you indicated fuel cells, etc. We're hearing everything. You're hearing from hydrogen. I was even in a meeting, I believe in Europe a couple of years ago, where someone talked about nuclear ferries. I think in Canada we're slightly more conservative on this. First, we're an LNG producing nation, so LNG ferries may not be a thing of the past in Canada, and indeed some ferries continue to be built with LNG, and we are indeed continuing on electric ferries. We'll see for the rest. There is a partnership that we see between Corvus and Toyota for a hydrogen fuel cell technology. That is great, but we're looking at the various technologies, and we're actually investing in a research chair project that will look for some new technologies on this in the future. I would be interested to hear as well a little bit more. I heard there was an explosion aboard the ferry, potentially due to the batteries. And if you don't mind, and I know some of our attendees have asked questions on this, it would be useful to get a little bit more precision on this, please.
Yeah, indeed.
Halfdan, sorry, Philippe.
Yeah, indeed, it was a question from Captain Jamie Marshall of BC Ferries, and since they also have hybrid electric ferries, he was just wondering what happened with the explosion. We know that battery ferries are fire prone or more fire prone, but
I think maybe there's some confusion, because there was an explosion in the battery room on a ferry a couple of years ago in Norway.
Mm-hmm.
Where it turned out that the local firefighters didn't know how to fight the fire, so they didn't do things right, and that's why it developed all night, all during the night. But that's not the problem we had. We simply just had an electric component fail in the transformer room, so we haven't had any incidents with the batteries. We haven't had any overheating, nothing like that. So
did you need external support, or was this tackled by the crew, this incident?
It was on the shore, so there was simply a component that failed, and so just like when a fuse fails, there can be some smoke, and but it was nothing significant. But it just happened, and we're just figuring out now if it was just a typical component failure, or if maybe it's because we're pushing the systems too much, charging too fast or whatever. But on board the ferry, there's no problem, and it sails like usual.
Yes, there's actually, to say with batteries, there's two questions. One is regarding the aging of batteries, and the other one is safety related. Hold on a second. Yeah, safety of batteries when you compare with normal, what this person calls normal diesel powered ferries. So the safety aspect of, let's say, conventional diesel propulsion compared to batteries is one aspect, and then the safety the aging of batteries. Perhaps you can comment, and then perhaps Øyvind.
We haven't seen any decrease in performance in the batteries. I just asked the chief captain here a couple of weeks ago if he had noticed a decrease in charging speed or anything, and he said no, everything was still working as when we started. So that's great. About the safety concerns, we are actually not concerned at all. I would say that we almost feel more safe because the energy density in a battery is not as high as in a diesel tank, the thing is, the new maritime batteries, they have very strict regulations on how they perform, and if anything went wrong, we have a foam system that actually injects foam in between the individual fuel cells. to actually start a battery fire in a modern maritime battery, you basically have to blow a blowtorch at it. It's just not going to happen. But it could develop heat if one of the cells crack or something like that. But that heat would be arrested by both the liquid cooling that we have that runs through all the systems, all the batteries. But then in case it developed, then we have the foam that we can inject, and it cools batteries and smothers fire. But I would like to underline that we feel very safe, and also we can't lose fuel line no matter what position the ship is in. Everything is bolted in, the cables are bolted in, so I wouldn't be concerned in a well-designed electric ship. Our passengers are no longer concerned. There were a couple of people who were like, we're not sure we want to sail with the Ellen if it's a stormy weather or whatever, but we never hear anything like that anymore. Because
Øyvind, there has been a question regarding hydrogen fuel cell power in your fleet, and actually this has also something to do with safety, of course, and with regulations, because there are no regulations existing for that at this very moment. Do you see this to become a reality within Bastø Fosen in the next couple of years? And if so, is there already a timing you have in mind for that? Maybe the next contract period after 2027?
I don't think that hydrogen will be in the most Horten route, because we have so good delivery of electricity. I think other routes that you have problem with the electricity on the land side, hydrogen will be actual. And I know that Torghatten Group are looking into that, and there will be a bid in the northern part of Norway with demand on hydrogen, I think. But I will not look into that in our operation. But as Halfdan says, the security have a high priority in the electrification of the vessels we are operating. And there are several safety barriers on board and on the land side to provide, and not to provide, to avoid a fire, and if you have a fire, to reduce the risk. So I think that the newest regulations are better and better on the electric ferries. So I'm quite confident in the system. I think that some of the situation you heard of, it's some years ago, and when you were experimenting some on the electric ferries.
Of course, the Norwegian Road Administration, they have been instrumental in the greenification of the Norwegian domestic ferry fleets. And as part of the concession you just mentioned, for you, Horten Moss, it was not necessary back then in 2014, but now many concessions, they are only granted on the condition that you have full electric ships or this or that. Something which we miss, and this brings me actually to Axel, we miss in Germany, where ferry operators are lagging behind, so to say, where you have one of your peers, which is retrofitting an aging ferry to LNG propulsion. Nothing wrong with that, of course, but it cannot be compared with the Norwegian situation. Can you, Axel, comment on that? I mean, why are things in Germany progressing so slowly, or is it actually, are you in limbo compared to Norway, but also Denmark, if we see? I mean, could you briefly give us an explanation?
I try, Philippe. As I mentioned in the beginning, we do not receive any subsidies. We do not have concessions in Germany. As far as I know, this situation is quite different to those ones of our Scandinavian colleagues here. That means if we are building, for example, an electrical ferry, we are just receiving maybe the additional costs for innovation, whatever that means. But you cannot really finance a whole ship by that. This is one point. The other point is, for the time being, we do not have hydrogen available. That means in a sufficient quantity, and it must be, of course, 100% green quality. Otherwise, it's useless to talk about. But however, Philippe, hydrogen is a chance for us to retrofit step by step. We, for example, we are studying ways to replace diesel auxiliaries by hydrogen fuel cells. And this technology is opened up for us the possibility to retrofit a whole ship from diesel to hydrogen. What is hardly possible with LNG. It's possible, but this is really extremely expensive. You have to pay more or less the same price in my view as for a new building, probably a handful of million less than a new building. As again, I personally see the future in hydrogen propulsion, and this is what I see for Germany as well.
Thank you very much, Axel. And now I see, Philip, we have 5 minutes left, and we have a number of questions we have received actually through the chat, which we are running here as a trial to find out if our audience is interested in. We have received a number of questions, and there are actually 2 questions taking us back to COVID, and I think it's worth to ask them and to have a short look at them. The first question is testing something which is of relevance? And the second one is if companies will increasingly look into frictionless customer booking and onboard experience so that you don't have your ticket to be scanned and things like that. And I would briefly like to touch on that because I think that's interesting for many of our people here in this session. Maybe I can ask Halfdan. Halfdan, you are on an island in Dagebüll, where Axel is operating. We now have a testing station where people can for free have a rapid COVID test. Is anything like that in place in Ærøfærgerne? And is there maybe also a requirement for people to be tested before they board the ferry?
No to both questions. We rely on municipal and state testing facilities. I should say that we are a municipal operator. But we haven't felt the need, also because Ærø has been blessed with very low numbers. We have, of course, reduced we only take 50% of the people that we used to. We have removed chairs and done various things, but we are not considering testing. And I think as now as the vaccines are coming and the numbers are going down further, I don't think we will do that. But it's a good idea.
Serge, how is the situation in Canada? Testing, and also the question, frictionless customer booking, further automatization and digitalization in a way in the wake of COVID. Do you see one of these 2 things gaining more relevance at short notice?
First, testing, no. As you know, the rapid tests are woefully unreliable. And I don't see governments installing rapid tests right beside the ferries. Furthermore, there's so many of them, so many facilities in different regions. I don't see it happening. You know, I heard my previous colleague talking about being on an island and blessed with very little cases, and we had the same with the island of Newfoundland until a couple of cases were introduced, and it ended up with hundreds of cases, and suddenly the provincial election got delayed. This thing comes in very, very quickly, and this is why we've discouraged travel, period. In terms of frictionless, contactless technology, it does make sense, and I know that some of our operators already have similar systems, but it again depends on the capacity of the operation to do this. So yes, it does make sense. I believe some of our operators already have something similar, but it does depend on the capacity.
Okay, thank you. I think it's 3 o'clock now, and Freddie, I think you agree we have to close this webinar, and I would like to thank the speakers, Serge, Halfdan, Axel, and Øyvind for being with us today. And I think there's enough, let's say, food for thought for perhaps even another webinar. It clearly shows that there's a lot we can discuss. Was there anything else, Axel, you wanted to? You just raised your thumb. It was just to say that you are happy. Very good. Thank you. So I would like to thank the 4 panelists for being here with us. I would like to thank the audience, and I look forward to meeting our audience at the next webinar, which we will duly communicate. So all the best. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you, all the best, and bye-bye.